Welcome, fans, to another Aftershock preseason recorded show. I am really excited about this one. I've been looking forward to talking with Tutul Rahman for a long time. So let me just do a quick introduction, Tutul, and then we'll get into this a bit. But you are the new Vice President of Marketing for the San Jose Earthquakes. You joined basically right at the end of last season. And now you've had the full off season, and now the season is about to start. This has to be a really exciting time for you to try to take all this in. You've been a longtime MLS fan. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about your podcast that you've done before, and I want to just get to know you a bit better and the fans to get to know you better. But first off, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on, first off. This is definitely the highlight of my day so far. Yeah, it's the off season has been fun, and for me, it's been a learning experience. I think I was mentioning to you before, it's fun and fast, so I'm getting used to the speed of everything.
And you've been a really long time like MLS fan. So you've been on the fan side of things, and now you're coming in. Obviously, you have a marketing background, and we'll get into that, a little bit later. But you've made this kind of almost career change. You've moved across the country. You're trying to take all this in, and the first home game is now just 2 weeks away. But not only that, it's against kind of your team.
Yeah.
That you've supported for a number of years. So you've got to be feeling like a mix of a lot of emotions right now. Just how's this whole experience been for you?
I forget who it was, but at an event, someone was giving me a little flack about it as soon as the home opener was announced. Yeah, so the Red Bulls are definitely my hometown team. I'm from Jersey. I'm very proud of being from Jersey. I actually lived in Harrison for a few years. Was a season ticket holder, so I definitely hold the MetroStars / Red Bulls in my heart. In my opinion, I can't lose, right? It's like when you have a hometown team playing now for your team that you are part of the club, which is an amazing thing to say out loud, to be honest. To me, it's an amazing kind of first game of the season. And yeah, like I'm excited to see what happens. And like I said, my mentality is like, I really can't lose with the game.
And you got a dog appearing in the background there. What's your dog's name?
JJ. I'm sorry about that.
Hey, JJ. No, absolutely. Yeah. Let's bring JJ onto the show. And does JJ have anything to say about how excited he is to start the season?
She's probably just like, why are you ruining my nap?
She might bet on that.
Yeah.
But you mentioned, you have been a Red Bulls fan for a while. In fact, you started with the MetroStars. So you've been through a bit of MLS history, and you yourself are a documentarian of U.S. history. I'm not even sure if I said that right. Yeah. But and I want to talk about the podcast here, but talk about some of the big moments that you've been able to witness there with the MetroStars and the Red Bulls, because those are two very storied MLS organizations.
Yeah, my first soccer, I really got into U.S. soccer with the 2002 World Cup. I was in high school at the time, and there was something cool about waking up super early in the morning and then how well that team was doing kind of out of nowhere, at least in the kind of general American sports zeitgeist. But my first foray into MLS in a big way was actually the Freddie Adu game. And I did talk about this a little bit in the 25 Stories podcast in the Freddie Adu episode. I was a freshman in college. My roommate was a big Man United fan, and I started going to like soccer bars to watch European soccer. And all my sports teams growing up were not based in New Jersey and New York, and it's because my parents kind of emigrated from Canada and the West and bounced around a lot. So my dad basically rooted for all the good teams in the late 80s and the early 90s. So I didn't have like a home team, if that makes sense. I was like a Bulls fan and a Niners fan, actually. So I went to the Freddie Adu game. It was like a really big event, to the point where like people who weren't even into sports wanted to go check out this kid, right? Like, and Sierra Mist commercial was out with Pele. It was like really in the big, not just in the sports sphere, but like almost in the news sphere. And they were playing And so we went to Giant Stadium. It was a great game. I think the Metro Stars won. Freddie Adu scored a goal, and for most people, it was sort of like, oh, that was a nice thing, and they kind of went on with their lives. But my roommate and I, because we were kind of already into soccer and watching kind of European soccer, started going to more and more games. And I think the thing that hooked me was one, rooting for the local team. Two, like there was something cool about going to a stadium that was so large but was never full, and you felt like you were part of an in crowd, if that makes sense. That you were part of something in the beginning stages, which is definitely spoke to me. And the third one is honestly like the supporters groups. And so I remember the second game, we were pretty much sitting right next to where the Empire Supporters Club, or ESC, sat. And I was thinking to myself, like, wow, this is like really different than any other sporting event you have in the States, really. And like each game, I got a little bit closer, and then I pretty much snuck around security to sneak into the section. And long story short, like I felt like I belonged to something that I didn't really feel with other sports teams that I followed, from the game experience to being on the inside of something or the early part of something, going to the bars, watching away games together. It was like you felt like you were part of a club. I was part of the big soccer, community, Metro fanatic on the early boards and stuff like that. So that's basically the beginning of my journey, and I stuck with following basically Major League Soccer and the Metro Stars and the Red Bulls, and then in U.S. soccer, and along the way, like I basically started getting interested in also like how the business side worked, which I think is kind of how the podcast started, and honestly how like a lot of my Twitter tweets tend to be very focused on like maybe how the business might have been thinking about it. So yeah, that's sort of my MLS journey.
Before we move off of that, and we haven't talked about this yet at all. I wanted to hear, what was it like to have your own kind of megastar come through in Thierry Henry? What was that like in your days with that club? And like when you found out about him coming to join, a player like that coming to join the Red Bulls, like how did that hit you?
I mean, it's funny because like the ethos of the club for a while was like our primary rival was DC United, and DC United was like the winning club, right, with LA Galaxy.
Right.
And so we were always like kind of always a second. There's so many kind of player stories you can say, like about getting Jaime Moreno, for example, for a minute and then losing him again and being killed by him in the playoffs. So like, and then we get the stadium, which honestly took forever, took a long time, the classic 60 to 90 day joke. And I was in Harrison at the time. And then we get Thierry Henry, Rafa Marquez, and I'll never forget like the banners that were up in Harrison. I don't know if you've ever been in Harrison. It's a small town. Yeah, it's a small town, like a very blue collar town. Soccer, like right next to Kearney, and like a lot of the original U.S. soccer, like Tony Meola, is from that kind of area. But like the glitz and glamour versus the backdrop of that town was like sort of like mind-boggling, if that makes sense, right? And then, yeah, had season tickets, and you're like, I'm watching literally Thierry Henry like feet away from me, and
right.
It was a mind-boggling experience, given that like I said, in college you would be in a bar at 6 a.m. watching this guy on TV like a continent away. So yeah, it was amazing. The DP kind of phase of MLS was like such a step up from where it was before, and I think Henry was a great example of it and bringing it to like the New York and New Jersey area.
You for a long time too, and you mentioned your affinity for the U.S. national team and starting with the 2002 World Cup. One of the things that you and I actually connected with a bit over on Twitter was some of the debates that go on national team Twitter. But you were one of the people that I always felt was bringing like some sanity to the craziness, if I could put it that way. in that particular sphere, and you always tried to like back up your takes with as much data, I think, as you had access to. How did you get like that engaged from a national team perspective, where it became a big focus of the tweeting that you used to do before you came to the earthquakes? And talk a little bit more about your connection with the national team.
Yeah, I mean, it's the national team is something like, I mean, all sports is so emotional, right? We can't help but be wrapped around in it, and the national team is like takes it to another level. But the way I think about it in work, I always trying to find. Yes, we have hunches of like this is what I see or what I feel like I'm seeing. But you always, at least in my past work, you always trying to find the data that either validates it or doesn't. And I guess that's that mindset of how I was in business is how I actually tweeted about U.S. soccer, if that makes sense. And I think the tweet that actually quote unquote broke me out was, I think it was like we were in Klinsmann era, and around the time of like people being really divided on like what the performance, not very dissimilar to what we see right now in Twitter sphere. And I was just like, all right, like how do, like regardless of how I feel, like how can I check to see if there's any numbers? And it was like I looked at ELO ratings and historically, like, and I went all the way back to Bora, and I was like, and it was like a visualization of the growth of the program and our dips and falls. And I like put like little things like, this is when we did this is when we did this. And that visualization was like, we can argue ELO or not ELO, but at least it's numbers oriented. Right. It's kind of objective. But I think it allowed people to step like a little bit away from their feelings and look at kind of the bigger picture of things and be like, oh, in the grand scale of things, we've had so much progress really quickly, and we're in this phase that we might be plateauing a little bit, or we might be on the down, or we might be slightly on the up. And it's in the bigger picture of things, it's not that big of a change that we're kind of going through, but emotionally, obviously, feels like that. And so, like all my tweets, I think that from then on were around that kind of idea, which is, yes, it's an emotional sport. We are fans, and we can't help but be emotional about it, and not everything needs to be logical. But I always try to like either validate or like actually sometimes I feel something and I look at the numbers and it just doesn't match. And I'm like, actually, maybe my emotions are being biased in this scenario, right? So it's honestly, it comes from how my brain works with work, if that makes sense. And that's how I naturally look at things.
I think that's how we actually connected a bit back in the day. And to be fair, like we've never met in person, and we've only chatted over Twitter DMs and things like that. But some of it was when you could see the emotions getting carried away, I would go like, "Oh, come on, Tutul, I know you know the data. Take a look at this and see if this changes your mind." And you would go back and rewatch games and such. And I always appreciated your dedication to that. I want to talk about the podcast. This is just a fascinating thing for me. So for anyone who doesn't know, Tutul and his brother, and I want you to talk about the origin of this thing and kind of your, kind of how the whole project happened and what you really enjoyed about it. But you put together this podcast with your brother called The 25 Stories That Made MLS. Did I say that exactly right?
Mm-hmm.
So I want people to be able to find this. It's on your favorite podcast platform. I listen to it on Apple Podcasts, and it's like my binge listen, and it was for a long time. And knowing that you probably won't be making too many more episodes at this point, given your work with the earthquakes, I've left a few out there just so that I have the comfort of knowing I can go back to them anytime. But this is such a fascinating podcast because you and your brother documented, in effect, the history of how we've gotten to this point, at least in MLS. What was the idea behind this? Why did you want to bring your brother into it? Just give us a little bit about how this podcast all came about.
Yeah, so after like about 7 years ago, my job took me to Atlanta. And my brother also, he lived in New York. He moved down to Atlanta a year after I moved down. And I think the year he moved down was Atlanta United's inaugural year, which was, I mean, talk about like also like melting your brain a little bit. People who've been in the league for a while, like the fact that Atlanta United was so successful was kind of like so surprising, and to see the city really embrace it. But with that, you know, I I've met so many fans that enter the league at that point, you know, and I think probably valid questions of why the league was the way it was, and I think you know, you still see it today, like allocation order, and you know, what is allocation money and all that, you know, like how do we get here? And I wasn't fully in since day one, but like I said, I think definitely part of MLS 1.0. So part of me wanted to put something out there in the 25th year of MLS that documented how this league became the way it was for so many of the fans that just enter the league, you know, which is happening, you know, right now with Charlotte, right? So we're going to have every year, like there's going to be new fans coming in new cities, and I think fairly are asking the questions, how did this become the way it is right now? And why are the things a little bit weird, or why are things like this versus that? And so I wanted to highlight and document like 25 things that happened that made the league kind of the way it was. And so that was sort of the iteration. And my brother was the perfect partner in this because he got really into U.S. soccer, and he came to a lot of Metro Stars and Red Bulls games with me as well. But he really got into MLS after coming to Atlanta. So he's actually an Atlanta United fan. And I think his background is much more creative. And so like I can talk about details about things forever. And so like having someone offset my kind of going into that like too specific, or going down a rabbit hole and something that might not matter in the greater storyline, he's like a great pivot against that. And so we had a good dynamic in terms of being able to tell stories in. At first, you know, we were aiming to get it done in 15 minutes. They all, I think, tended to be closer to 30 minutes, but he's the one that prevented me from talking for 3 hours on each topic. So you can thank him for that.
It was one of those ones that I would get to the end of 30 minutes and I'd be like, oh man, I want another 30 minutes on this topic. And you always did such a great job documenting every episode, your sources. So if someone goes back now and looks at every episode and they want to know more about it, all the information, the resources that you utilized are all available there. It's a fascinating, you know, kind of like almost museum in a way, and done in a verbal podcast form of MLS and its history. And you even had an episode in there where you talked about the earthquakes, and you know, kind of how the ownership, you know, was in San Jose and then it moved into Houston and then came back, and the process of building the stadium. I want to say it was around episode 7 or 8, something like that. I probably should double check that before the show, but you know, I was listening to it kind of more casually up until that point, and then I remember like that episode, I'm just like, man, this is like, now this is something special, because it really kind of connected me in a way that I hadn't yet connected with that part of the history of the league. As someone who covers the earthquakes, I hadn't really heard that told in that kind of story format. And I found that really fascinating. And one of the reasons I've always wanted to connect with you and be able to talk with you, even before you were now a part of the earthquakes, you know, I wanted to be able to have this conversation because I think that that element is so fascinating of it. Of the things that you got to like get into about that podcast, what's the thing that you learned that you look back and you're like, man, that thing, like, I didn't know that. And then once I went back and looked at this, it stuck out at me, and it's more important than I probably would have thought it would have been at the time.
I mean, so probably not answering your question exactly, but I appreciated the stories that I learned about before I entered MLS around the Freddie Adu time. So like the stories of the first 2-3 years, I think were super fascinating. And I think we actually started story 1 like well before Major League Soccer, because it was, you know, Major League Soccer came with the FIFA World Cup coming here.
Right.
And that started many, many years before that, you know? So I think the first, I want to say 3 or 4 episodes, like I knew sort of like the highlight points of it. when I was sketching it out, if that makes sense. But as I was doing my research into it, you found threads of things that you're like, wow, this is interesting. Let me dive a little bit more in here. And then, like I said, I probably had like many hours of content for each one of those episodes. When you look at the whole thing, my brother and I looked at it and was like, all right, what's the actual story? And then how do I tell the story as if like I was telling it in either someone's point of view or in an engaging way where it's like you're telling a buddy at a bar, like, probably doesn't, there's not a specific one that points out to me, but like, honestly, all of it, like there's a great article about all the things that Major League Soccer was looking at to Americanize the game. I mean, I think famously we had the penalty kicks, the running penalty kicks for the shootouts, which honestly I think it was great theater.
Pretty
to be honest,
pretty good idea.
But like you had some famous ones like that they were looking at, like having space behind the goal, like hockey, right? And you're like, it's documented. It's documented. They were actually like, the other famous one I'll say that I really love was a Bruce Arena one, where he is actually capped nationally in 2 sports, which is amazing, and
That's right.
lacrosse and soccer. So, so yeah, you always find little tidbits in there. I will say, as a final note, there, I had a huge amount of appreciation for actually the journalists that cover the sport early on, like the Paul Kennedys of the world, and to be able to go back and like find really well crafted articles that explain the history. Super appreciative of that. And like I said, I feel like I wanted to share that feeling of appreciation and knowledge to any new fan of Major League Soccer, because it's very easy to get caught up in the newness of everything. But there's a lot of good history and a lot of people that built that history that are still out there.
So you don't just walk into a situation like, vice president of marketing of the Earthquakes without having a good background in marketing to begin with.
Yeah.
But also, you've been on the East Coast for most of your life. We mentioned before the show you'd spent a couple of years in Austria, but growing up on the East Coast, so you not only you moved across the country for this opportunity. It's your first opportunity within MLS or any of the major sports in the U.S. But you've been in marketing obviously a long time. Tell us a little bit about just kind of your background in marketing, and at what point did you decide like, oh, I want this to actually become part of my career, and how did the Earthquakes opportunity show up on your radar?
Sure. So I'm I guess a traditional brand marketer. And so I went to school in NYU for marketing and accounting. My first job was like L'Oreal, and then majority of my career is with Coca-Cola for about 12 years across multiple different functions. A lot of it very fun, including like being the brand manager on the energy drinks business. I worked in the US side on Powerade or sports drinks. I was a global director on sports drinks as well. So I got to work on FIFA and Olympics, and I had a stint in Europe leading kind of their iced tea business out there. And then I came back to Atlanta most recently to work on sodas. But I think so my experience is very, I think, more traditional brand marketing in that sense, and what you would expect to a certain degree with like Coca-Cola and some of the bigger companies like that. But as you know, my passion is soccer, and I was actually about to embark in entrepreneurship in Atlanta. I thought my next challenge was going to be taking everything I learned in the previous few years and starting my own business. I was literally, I think, about to sign a 10-year lease. I was probably a few weeks away of doing that on a retail space for the idea was a plastic-free convenience store. I'm throwing that out there. Someone should start it. It's definitely needed in the world.
It's a great business idea.
Yeah, if you need help with that, I have a lot of work done already for you. So but I remember talking to someone, and it's a big life step, right, to sign such a long-term lease and, bet on yourself to start a business. And I think they were saying, hey, is there anything you can think of that would make you stop doing this? Stop yourself in your tracks and change gears. And I literally said, I was like, I only thing I think of is working in soccer, because it would be one of those things that would be like something. Marketing is what I'm really good at from a professional standpoint. Soccer is what I truly love. It's very rare in life you get those two things to come together. And I want to say 3 days later, I get a LinkedIn message, which honestly, I don't even know how I read the message, because I was avoiding LinkedIn for a really long time working on the business. It was just a little bit of serendipity, and they were like, "Hey, we're looking for someone to lead the marketing organization of the soccer team in San Jose, and we thought your background is interesting. Are you willing to talk?" And talked with the recruiter, got a phone interview, got an in-person interview, and then when the offer came, it was like, pack your bags, like this is your time to live the dream a little bit. So yeah, then I got into a car, basically left all my stuff in Atlanta, still there, and just had 1 week of Airbnb and figured everything else out.
So when we talk about the front office of the San Jose Earthquakes, one of the names in that front office group that leads the club is your boss, Jed Meddy, and he has been with the Earthquakes a long time. In fact, some of us from the media side, we have to work with Jed and his team, quite a bit on a regular basis. For the media coverage that we do and around the team. That's not really the area you're in. You're more in that traditional marketing side, but talk a little bit about kind of the organization. How is it set up? How does it work? What does your department look like, and what other elements does Jed oversee within the Earthquakes? Just to give fans kind of a sense for how marketing would work in in Major League Soccer.
Sure. So Jed, you obviously know him really well. He's the executive vice president, overseeing my department of marketing, also communications, also community. And so my department of marketing is, I think you said more traditional, and I would agree with that. So you have the digital marketing side with Paul Dewhurst and Perna, who anchor on the social communication aspect of it, but also website. You have the content side. So think of like every single thing that you see, whether it's what you see in the stadium, so like all the imagery in the stadium, what you see on videos that come out. So like, whenever Montero got announced, there's a hype video ready to go. That's that team, and that's led by Chris McDougall, and I think a few other people, like Taz, who's like an amazing designer and brand person, and Sam Benavidez, who's an amazing video editor. And honestly, they all do more than that, right? So each one actually does a double job around game day presentation as well. And then the third part of the equation is kind of fan engagement and advertising. And so think about like events. We're doing like the jersey launch event. It's a plug. On Friday, we're launching.
Check your inboxes for the jersey launch event.
Please come through. It's going to be a great event. But those kinds of events, watch parties, going to youth soccer, clinics, camps, like creating that one-on-one connection. Email marketing is led by Charlotte Muscroft and Kang Nguyen. So those are kind of the three major groups. Outside of marketing, and so outside of my team is like PR and communications. So that's Jake and Pedro. You have the community group, it's led by Adi. And we work kind of really closely with the other kind of major functions. So you have partnership marketing, so marketing that works with our partners, like PayPal, obviously PayPal Park, and then ticketing, and then operations, so like actually getting things done on the field, on the stadium. So if you think about those as the big buckets, I have the little marketing side of it.
So now you're going to be coming up to your like first real game. You got to observe a couple games toward the end of last season, but but now, you're fully hired. You've been through this entire off season, and now there's going to be this kind of switch flipped, which is you're going from off season and preseason mode into season mode. How does life change, you think, based upon what you know? Like, from a game day perspective and other things, like how does the job kind of morph, around the game day experience?
Yeah, and like I feel like you should probably get me back on in a few weeks, right?
We'll do another one.
This is what you thought. This is what happened. Yeah. So I think right now, yeah, you're right. The off season has been like a lot of planning, trying to get ahead of things. What do we want to do a little bit differently? I think because of my background, I'm trying to bring a little bit more structure, if it makes sense. So like making sure, hey, is there a way for us to measure if things are working out there, and not just like off gut feeling. We kind of talked about this in terms of the data side of it. Like I need that, right? So, so implementing some of that, I think we did a pretty great. The team honestly did great work, interviewing like dozens of fans of different types of people from all over the place to try to map their journeys of how they became San Jose Earthquakes fans. Like, how do they get in? Like, what drives them? And I think that's getting us better at like figuring out how we can make the experience better. What's going to make people come back to the games, and that obviously then yields into like new ideas and how we should be doing things a little bit more differently. So all that thought process was like in the off season. Part of the off season was actually a learning experience for me and how just things work, right? So I'm sure if my team was on, or someone on my team was on, they would be like, yeah, part of it was that, part of it was like us trying to tell Tutul how things actually happen. So and now like we're 2 weeks away from home opener, which is exciting. And then you're also like, wow, this is like sort of, I guess, equivalent to opening of a new play, right? You've been writing it, you've been directing it, you've been walking through the process, and you still get those butterflies about making sure when the lights go on, everything works like the way you wanted, you envisioned it in your mind.
Right.
And so I think that's the feeling I'm having right now. I've been told by everyone that once we get through the first few games, it starts switching over into like, all right, we have like the kind of repetition on things. But I am truly excited. We have a lot of cool stuff coming out, I think, for the fans at the game itself. Some of it coming out on opening day, some of it coming out a few games after that. So yeah, it's a lot of like things that we've been working on for a while that we're finally getting to unveil a little bit. So it'll be really great.
Yeah, when I talked with Jake, he tells me press release is pretty much coming every day. He's got a huge backlog from all the things that you guys have to talk about, and a new partnership announced today with Roku, for example, that Ian Anderson has done such a fantastic job in that particular area, and it sounds like there's more to come. So really quickly before we wrap up here, I know there's a couple things that you probably can't talk about quite yet, but there are probably things that you'd like to talk about. So what is it that you've taken kind of from this journey map? I've done that before, by the way. I understand the process you're talking about. So when you've mapped out this journey, what kind of things did you take from that you've already begun incorporating into the game day experience, things that you can share as of right now that fans will notice when they come to the stadium for the first game?
Yeah, I think the easiest one in my head is like you start seeing as many as unique stories, and every story is unique to a certain degree, right? You see a lot of similarities, right? And one of them I would say is like the similarity of someone being a fan of soccer and honestly might be like their first team is like a European team or a Liga MX team or something. And they come to the stadium usually with a friend and they enjoy, which I think I think PayPal Butter does a wonderful job of like having that bar experience and like having just a fun vibe. You come for that and then you end up liking and loving the energy of the stadium, how close you feel to the field, and you are pleasantly taken surprised in a positive way in the quality of play, right? And when you see it up close, I think Major League Soccer in a macro sense has been improving tremendously in that part. So and that story, as we saw that come clearly for, I think, I would say roughly 35% of the people spoke to me personally, right? So in my journey, right? Because it almost mimics exactly how I became a fan. And so what comes out of that, I think, like, you're like, okay, how do we help encourage people to come to the games with their friends? How do we go to places where they already come together? And one of them was like a very obvious idea to me, at least, is like, we know that there's certain bars in San Jose and San Francisco where American outlaws come together, groups come together to watch games. So shout out to Zach Holman. He showed me some bars out in San Francisco, and one of them was McTeague Saloon, where the AO goes and meets. And I was like, you know what we should end up doing is, at least for a home opener, is working with the bar, getting people to come watch EPL games before the Quakes game, and then we'll have a bus come pick them up, and make it really easy to come in. You get dropped off a few hours before the game. You get to enjoy some of the tailgating if you want to do that, or you want to come to the Epicenter side of it and enjoy the food trucks and enjoy the experience. And then we'll have a bus to send you right back to McTeague Saloon. And if you want to stay out, you can stay out. It's a very small, I think, it's a very small tactic. It's something that's definitely happening, and we want to mimic that actually here in San Jose, because we have in downtown San Jose, we have buses going in. So partnering with O-Flats here in downtown San Jose for the similar type of thing. But you start wanting to build that habit or the ritual of doing that, because I think the journeys and my personal story would suggest that you're going to naturally find people who want to be Quakes fans. You just have to get them there to a certain degree and build it upon something that they're already doing, and create that sense of belonging through this kind of habit that they already have, right? So that is a very small example, but hopefully that makes sense, taking like journey all the way into something that we're doing from the marketing side.
I've already talked to a couple people who are from that part of the North Bay who they're either going to take advantage of the bus, or they really appreciate what you're trying to do and believe that type of thing is going to go a long way toward helping to connect the Earthquakes to other parts of the Bay Area. Tutul, it's been amazing to have you on. I do not want this to be the last time, particularly if the U.S. is playing in the World Cup. Maybe we can connect again around that a little bit. That would be a lot of fun, because I know you're not short of opinions on the U.S. national team, and you can probably talk more freely about them than you can the Earthquakes at this point. So maybe we'll get to do it then. And yeah, let's catch up mid-season too. If there's anything you want to talk about in terms of the programs and things that are going to be introduced mid-season and such. And once you get your feet underneath you from the game day experience, it'd be great to reflect back and see how things are going and what new things might be coming out.
Anytime you want me on, Jamon, I'm back.
All right, Tutul. So good to have you. Thanks, fans. Again, like, subscribe, turn on those notifications to know when we're going to have the shows throughout the season. But you can expect the Aftershock to bring you the same post-game coverage that you've come to know and love from us. Tutul, again, once again, great to have you on. Super happy that you're here. Fans, if you want to follow him on Twitter, you can do so. @Tutul is my name. Is where you can find him on Twitter, and not as many hot takes coming out these days. That's to be expected, but definitely do that. And also stay tuned to the Aftershock and to our YouTube channel for more updates and a new article that'll be coming out here very quickly, if not already by the time you see this, on the third part of my series on Chris Leach as the GM of the Earthquakes. Again, Tutul, thank you so much for your time. And fans, we will be talking to you again here soon. Have a good rest of your day.